In this video tutorial, we're going to be looking at the new Workgroup ResultManager tool from Innovyze. This is a web-based application that allows end users to view results from the workgroup applications from our modelling software portfolio, namely InfoWorks ICM, ICMLive and SWMMLive. In this presentation, we're going to be looking very briefly at the tools and displays sets that are available within the software. The software runs entirely within web browsers. It is not installed as a desktop application. This means that not only can it be used on traditional laptop and desktop computers, but also on tablets and mobile PCs. As long as the software is running an up-to-date web browser, ResultManager will display the results from the various workgroup applications. In particular, we're using Chrome today, but the software also works in the new Edge browser that's available in Windows 10 and Mozilla Firefox. Please note that at the moment Internet Explorer is not supported by ResultManager. The software, being deliberately designed to work on tablets as well as on desktop PCs, has a very clean and very simple interface. You'll notice the simple menu on the left hand side and a series of buttons. The buttons are deliberately spaced out to allow operation from tapping your finger as well as the use of a traditional mouse. Software operates in two ways. There's the power user mode and the regular community user mode. Power users are the people who set up which display are going to be available, which results are going to be available for display, and the style and the look of the software in general. The normal end user simply opens up a web browser, goes into ResultManager, and then utilizes the preset displays to look at the various flows or depths or velocities that are available in the modeled results. So let's start this presentation by taking on the role of a power user. And as I said, the power user is the person who sets everything up, ready for the community of users to then use very quickly and very easily and very simply. Operations available to the power user are dictated by an icon shown in this pink color. Icons in the green color are operations that are available to the standard user. If you're logging in as a standard user, you will not see any of the icons colored pink. So I'm a power user, so we'll start by going into the communities menu item. And as I said, this is the area where everything is set up and all the various results are defined, and the style of those results is shown as well. The software relies as a prerequisite on having results from one of Innovyze's workgroup applications, so InfoWorks ICM, InfoWorks ICMLive or SWMMLive. The models for those applications must be stored in a workgroup database, and the results must have been stored to a central shared location. And ResultManager connects to that shared location and connects to the workgroup database in order to ascertain the network, the results and the general display types that are available. In this particular case, we have set up a single community area where we are looking at a model called Naperville, which is based in the USA. Now within the Naperville model group there are a series of different networks, and Demoville is the network that we're particularly interested in, and in this particular case the network has a series of commits in its history, and we're looking at the latest commit, which is commit number 9. Within commit number 9 there is a single simulation run that's been done, and at the moment we have published results for up to 4 different points in the network, and those are available to graph at any time. Now, to start with, we need to be able to select those points. These have obviously already been put into the network. But if we want to look at the network as a whole, as a community user, we're setting up everything, so we want to look at our map of the network. By pressing the map, we'll be taken to the standard map view. The network is extracted from the workgroup database and is shown in a geoplan type view. The mapping in the background is extracted either using OpenStreetMap, which is an open source mapping application available for web browsers. We could also use Esri's ArcGIS Online or any other freeware mapping applications that are supported for web browser use. At the moment, this background is in OpenStreetMaps. Once we have looked at the model, we're able to then choose from that network any of the objects on display for the purpose of reporting results for those objects. So if I wanted to pick, say, this particular pipe here, I can just select it on the GeoPlan view and then come across to my menu item and specify that I want to add that particular object to the selection available to the general community so that they can view the results of that pipe. Now this is a very clever approach which makes the software very quick to operate from end user's point of view, because rather than publishing the results of potentially tens if not hundreds of thousands of pipes, the community users who set everything up define just a small subset, and it will only be the results for that subset that are generally available to all users. The power user can look at any result for any pipe and then choose to have that available to the rest of the community. So in my particular case, I can choose to take that particular item. We're going to look at the downstream flow for that particular pipe and submit that as a request to the main database. In the background, various Windows services are now working away, connecting to the Workgroup database, going to the results store and extracting the flow results for that particular pipe, and they will appear in the list that we saw previously. So let's go back to that list and see if the results are waiting for us. So back to the community view, and you can see here that at the bottom of the list is the fact that that link has been selected, so 94.1. It's gone into the list and it is awaiting the results. The results will appear within the general data store within typically just a few seconds, at most a few minutes, depending on network speed and other operations of the server. Once the results are generally available, the icon will be promoted and it will appear in the list at the top of the screen. So while we're waiting for those results to be published to the server for looking at in the web browser, we can look at the results associated with any of these particular links here. Let's start with the link at the top of the screen, 18.2. This is a link where we are looking to report on the flows. So I can select the link from the list and check the data to make sure that everything is okay. And as a power user here, I'm using these tools simply to ensure that the data has been extracted from the database and the results store and will be available to any general user who's operating with the software. Again, the view is kept very simple, very streamlined to ensure that drawing is as quick as possible. Once we have the chart on the screen, we can then use various menus to define the way that chart is displayed and looked at. At the moment, as I said, we're using a very straightforward plain line with no great detail on it. If we want to change that and we wanted to use the perhaps more familiar area under the graph type view, we can select that as the preferred view for this particular graph. Or we could use the bar graph operation. That would perhaps more typically be used with rainfall and hiatus graphs, but nevertheless we can use any of the different line types with any of the graphs that we have. I'll put it back to a line because we are looking at flow and that's the traditional type. If we want to, we can change the way the line is drawn and use it either as a splined line or a stepped line. And again, the choice is really up to you as to how that graph is actually drawn, the techniques that are used to smooth out the spacing between the actual recorded points. For the majority of the time, the default view will provide the preferred view for that particular data type. I can also choose to add a legend to the top of the graph, in which case we will add the name of the run of the simulation that was done, and we may well also wish to add tooltips and perhaps also show the actual recorded points on the graph as well. With the tooltips and the points on display, we can hover our mouse either on a particular point, as we can see here, or we can move around the display in order to pick up the actual value on a line at any particular point on the curve. And we can do that for any of the data items that we have here. Again, the more items that you choose to include on your display, the longer it will take to draw all the items. In this case, it's only a single graph, so things are very quick. Time varying data generally has a time axis, and different countries and different regions of the world use different formats to display time. At the moment, the time and date information at the bottom of the screen here is shown using the European format of day, month and year, so the 15th of August 2016 in this particular case. If, however, we were in the United States of America, they traditionally switch around the date format so that the month is displayed before the day, which obviously is important to get that right, particularly when your days and your months are figures less than 12. It's not clear which way round it would be. So we can use the drop down on the date format here to flick the date around to now say August 15th, 2016. And the same applies for the units that are for the quantity that we're looking at. So for flows, we could be in meters cubed per second, or we could be in cubic feet, or megaliters per day, or whatever it may be, or million gallons per day for the American format. So we can choose to change all of those operations as well. I'm recording this presentation in England, so I will switch back to the European date format. The axis can be navigated and zoomed in on using either the mouse button to roll the mouse, and that will zoom and scroll using the traditional sort of zoom in capabilities, so we can just zoom in like this. If I was on a tablet, I would be using my thumb and my finger to pinch the screen in order to be able to view the particular part of the curve that I was interested in. If you're on the more traditional type of desktop view, then one of the common ways to zoom in on graphs is to use a range selector, and here we can use the range selector at the bottom of the screen. We can drag our two selector points in to focus on that particular section of the overall graph results, and we can see that the two selectors show us the start point and finish point of that particular graph. So lots of different operations for zooming in and scrolling and generally looking at the model data. You'll notice the menu underneath says Live Updates. And you'll recall that at the beginning of the presentation I mentioned that the Result Manager software works with all of the workgroup applications, and in particular ICMLive and SWMMLive. Now both of those two derivatives are simulation engines that run constantly and continuously all day and every day. And therefore, at any point in time, a previous set of results may well be updated with newer data for a later period of time, or an alternative scenario or an alternative strategy. And so Result Manager has the capability to not only look at the very latest simulation, but to choose the current simulation and any previous or last simulations as well, going right back to the previous 10 simulations. Now this obviously only applies for the live updates, but nevertheless the software will happily cope with that, and every time anybody comes into the software they will be presented with the very latest set of simulation results. Last but not least, we can also look at more detailed properties associated with that graph, so details about the actual asset that we're looking at, so in this case the conduit, its asset ID, the quantity that we're looking at, flow in this case in meters cubed per second, and the start and end times for the graph that we're looking at. We can also look at statistics for the actual simulation as well. We can look at things like the minimums and maximums, and obviously the integrals for the flow patterns as well. Now again, this is all information that as the power user we are looking at to determine whether or not this information should be generally published to the usership. We can repeat the setup for all of the different items that we wish to publish for the community. So just as a quick extra example, we could pick a different pipe and almost repeat the operation that we did before and go through the same tasks for that particular chart. Okay. Now, single charts are fine, but generally speaking, quite often we will want to look at a combination of different charts. Okay, and for that we can use two other types of view, which are called the board view and the desk view, and these produce a setup on the screen either as a series of columns or as a series of rows or as a layout of tiles, so a bit like a dashboard if you like. Okay, and I've got a couple of operations which are set here to set up a board view with 4 columns in it, a desk view with 2 panels, and a desk view with 4 panels, and in each of those different views we will have a combination of these 4 chosen points in the network that we're currently reporting on. So let's start with the board view and have a quick look at how that operates. So a board view is used to define how the various selected links are displayed, and in this particular case we can see that we very quickly produced the 4 graphs just as small thumbnails at the top of the screen. And with that done, we can then choose the different operations that we want to do, whether we want those set out horizontally or vertically, as the case may be. And in this case, we've got them done in the vertical format, so we've got 3 followed by 1 in an additional column. As you click the mouse or tap your finger if you're using a pad, then the display will immediately update and change as the operation goes through. Picking on any one of those particular graphs then allows us to change the actual attributes and display of that particular graph. So if we wanted to change the height of that particular graph, we could extend its view, make it deeper on the display and see what's going on. We could also do the same operation for the graph next door, where we could change its width perhaps, and we could make that a lot wider, so it's then moved in the display in order to fit the view space as optimally as possible. We could change the layout of the other 2 graphs in order to generally fill up our view space until we are happy with the layout of that particular board. Once we are happy with the layout of that particular board and we've got all the settings as we want them for the various graphs that we have, then we can save that display. If it's a board that we're modifying, as is the case here, we have obviously the operation to save as. And when we save the board, that will then be available in that look and feel for the general users of the software. And when they pick that board, everything will be laid out as defined by the general higher level power user. Now, that's the operation of boards, and in a very similar vein we have desks as well. Desks are laid out in a slightly different format. It's a bit like a sound desk. If you've ever been to the theatre, you'll know that they have these enormous desks with lots of buttons and sliders, and they're all laid out in various formats. Well, it's the same idea here. So we have here our desk, which is in this case got a couple of columns, and in this particular case the columns are in their own space, and you can see there's a little border running around this particular operation and this particular graph as well. And within that desk unit we can choose to look at the properties of the attribute, or we can look at the run statistics as we've done before, looking in each case at all of the data that's available for our particularly chosen graphs. And as before, we can choose to set everything out as we want. So we have operations on our particular panel. So again, we could resize the selection if we wanted to. We could move everything around, or we could remove various items from the desk as well. By the same token, we can choose to add in a new panel. So at the moment we're looking at 18.2 and 7.2. We could add in as an additional panel 33.2, and you can see now we've got one extra panel added to our desk, and again we have the ability to look at the various properties and the various statistics associated with those graphs. If, having built up the panels on the desk, we decide actually a little bit of further interrogation is needed of our data set, we can directly from this particular desk go to the Open Chart button that's available, and that will immediately open that chart and take us back to the view that we saw before, where we have the ability to define the various details about the way that particular graph is shown. So that's the community user who goes through and sets up the items that are going to be made generally available from the network as a whole, and the style and look and feel of the way those graphs and charts are presented. We've been looking at adding data in. Obviously, we also have the operation to remove a chart. So this is the chart that I added in at the beginning of the presentation. If I've decided that it's not appropriate, that the flows and results and depths and results for that particular pipe not appropriate for those to be published, then we can simply remove that chart, and that will remove it from the available displays for the general users. So let's have a look at the views that the general user has. So the general user will always start at the home screen and then be presented just with the browser option. He will not see any of these purple items, so he won't have the ability to look at the actual databases that are connected to ResultManager, and he won't have the ability to define new boards, new desks, new panels, or to publish results for other items in the network. He can just look at the items that have already been set. So we'll go in and look at this as a browser option. And again, we have the very simplistic style display with a 3/4, 1/4 panel to the left hand side and the general display area in the middle. And within the charts operation, we can see the 4 published points in the network where we are reporting on results. And if we click on any one of the buttons here or tap with our finger if we're on a tablet, then it will simply open that particular graph using the layout and format as defined by the power user. So using the time axis in whichever format was done, using the vertical axis and the units that were done there, using any zoom extents that we had. The user can also choose to look at that same map picture. So if the general user wants to look at the map of the network, that is absolutely fine. And once in the map view, as is standard for any online mapping service such as Google Maps or OpenStreetMaps, you can zoom in onto various items in the network, and we can make a selection from various items in the network. So we can select a subcatchment, for example, or we could select a pipe, or we could select a manhole, and they can all be picked out from the network. The boards and the desks were set up by the power user, you'll remember. So within this display, as well as having the ability to look at the individual charts for those particular items, we can also look at the boards and the desks that were set up. So in this particular case, you'll remember that we had a board set up with 4 columns in it, and if I press that button, those 4 items will be reproduced exactly as they were before. Initially, they'll be shown with the format as defined by the community user, but if necessary, then the individual graphs can be resized simply by selecting their items, size boxes from the display that we have here. And now we've changed the chosen format of all of the different graphs to be slightly larger in size, and they've appeared now as a single stream of data which I can go up and down with on my particular mouse, or I could scroll with my finger on the screen if I was using a tablet. I can also minimize the results back down again in exactly the same way in order to put the display back as we had before. There's also a select button available for each of those graphs, and having selected a particular graph from the board, I'm presented with various actions in this lower panel that I can undertake. So as before, I could then from that board go and open that particular graph in its own right, and again have then immediate access to the individual data and properties and statistics for that particular graph. Going back to my browser, the final operation I can use is the desk view. And again, these are going to be shown in exactly the same way as set up by the community user. So we can go for 2 panels. In this particular case, we can look at all the data that we had, the statistics that we had for those individual graphs. And again, we're given the option of being able to make our 2 panels a bit bigger, and to be able to, if necessary, zoom in on any individual graph. We can drag it and drop it to get to a particular point in time. We can use the horizontal scroll bar on that particular graph, or I could, if I was on a tablet, use my finger to scroll left and right. In each case, we are shown the asset data for the views, and we can choose to either have that shown by default or just available on demand. And again, just by clicking the mouse or tapping the button with your finger if you're on a tablet or a touchscreen laptop. The final operation are any particular arrangements that we want to change, any particular settings, or in this particular case, if we want to then clear off our view and set ourselves back to normal operation, you'll see that we're just prompted to select the Browse button from the menu in order to reset ourselves back to the standard view, and from here we can choose to look at any other operations that we want, or if other networks and models have been published, they would appear on this drop down, and we could switch from one particular network to a completely different network in the database, and then use the relevant charts, relevant boards and relevant desks in order to look at that data. Or of course, perhaps one of the more popular views is to use the mapping button simply to go in and have a look at the map data for that particular operation. In this particular case, as a single tile, which we can put in its own particular view space if that's what we want to do. So that just gives you a very brief overview of the new Result Manager tool. To remind ourselves of the points we made at the beginning, the Result Manager is designed to link with both workgroup database models and the subsequent results from those workgroup applications. So that's InfoWorks ICM, InfoWorks ICMLive and SWMMLive. The software runs entirely within a web browser, so there's no need to install any software on an end user PC. You simply fire up your chosen web browser, go to the site name, the URL for the site, and you'll be presented with the software immediately. Individuals will either go in as a basic user who simply has a browser capability, or as a power user where we can define individual pipes and nodes and catchments where we don't need to look at the results for those particular items. So that's an overview of the new Workgroup Result Manager from Innovyze.